Building a better Bay Area. Moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC 7 News.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. I'm Liz Kreutz. Thanks for joining us. I'm in for Kristen Z. You're watching Getting Answers live here on ABC 7. We're asking experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. Today, we're going to get into the details of a new proposal in San Francisco that one city supervisor thinks could be a solution to the homelessness crisis. This is going to require the city to provide shelter to the unhoused. Also, you are going to want to work up your appetite for this one. Oakland Restaurant Week is underway. We are talking to one of the participating chefs who opened up her restaurant during the pandemic. Looking forward to that conversation. And also, we're going to talk about the debate over whether or not you need a fourth dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. Vaccine makers Moderna and Pfizer are asking for emergency use authorization for a second booster. But is it really necessary? Who would actually benefit from this extra dose? So I know we are waiting for UCSF's Dr. Monica Gandhi. I'm told she's here, and she's saying it's complicated whether or not we're going to need that fourth dose. So Dr. Gandhi, thanks for joining us today. Help clear things up for us. A lot of people are wondering, are we going to get a fourth booster shot? If so, when? What do you say about it?
So I just had to take 1 minute to explain the immune system to answer this question, because just think of it in 3 different ways. There are 3 different arms of the immune system. There's antibodies, which are your first line of defense, and mostly they're all up here in your nasal area. And then there's what's called cellular immunity. You form in relationship to the vaccines T cells and B cells. And T cells help B cells make new antibodies if they ever see the virus again in the future. So what happened with Omicron is that the antibodies that we got from 2 doses didn't work as well because there were so many mutations, 32 mutations across the spike protein, and everyone got a booster, or anyone who wanted got a booster that helped prevent mild infections. But actually, CDC data just showed the other day that there was really good protection against severe disease, even with the 2 doses against Omicron. And that's really because your T cells, B cells protect you against severe disease. Now, antibodies, if you get a boost, will go up, but they'll come down again after about 4 months, according to the CDC. So the question is, who needs a fourth booster? Who needs their antibodies temporarily up? And usually, most people who are immunocompetent can wait for their B cells to make more antibodies, but the people who need their antibodies nice and high are people who are older, because they can't wait. They just can't wait for their B cells to make antibodies. They need those antibodies nice and high. And if they see the virus, they could get severe disease. So people who are older, over 75, according to a CDC study that showed people at risk for severe breakthroughs are over 75, and people who are immunocompromised.
So as you did mention in an op-ed that you wrote for the Chronicle today, we're seeing 2 different approaches from Pfizer and Moderna when it comes to this fourth booster. So if you could just talk again about what are those approaches, and is there one that you think makes most sense?
Yes. So what Pfizer is asking for is a fourth dose for anyone above 65. And that goes along with what I just said, that really the people who are most at risk for severe breakthroughs are actually over 75. By the way, UK is only approving it for over 75, but they are most at risk, older people. What Moderna wants is for everyone to get a fourth shot, 18 and above. I do not believe the Moderna approach makes sense. I believe the Pfizer approach makes sense because, again, you can get a fourth shot as a 20-year-old. Your antibodies will go up temporarily, but they'll come right back down after 4 months. But you have that good immunity to protect you against severe disease. It's changing our understanding of what the vaccines were meant to do. They were never meant to prevent every single mild infection from COVID. They were meant to protect us against severe disease. It's why we created the vaccines.
Right, and this reiterates or gets into some of what you already spoke about. I'm looking at questions we're getting from people on Facebook as well. Is there a chance that too much booster can have a negative effect and make us actually less immune or more basically immune to the vaccine?
It's a really good question. There has been, some immunologists are concerned that if you keep on seeing the old version of the spike protein, it actually, remember, it wasn't developed against alpha or beta or gamma or delta or omicron. It was actually the ancestral strain. It was called D614G, but anyway, it was a spike protein, the old spike protein. You keep on training your T cells to respond to an old variant. Some immunologists call that original antigenic sin, that you're not allowing your B cells to adapt to the variant that they see in front of them. We're currently in BA2 era. And so that is a concern if you keep on getting the same one again and again. On the other hand, I would say that what we've seen from the UK, from Israel, is that older people getting that fourth shot, no harm, and certainly has protected, especially with very older people, against severe disease. So again, the National Health Services of UK just approved this week a fourth shot for those over 75. And Sweden, about a month ago, approved a fourth shot for those over 70.
All right. So when do you expect a decision on this here in the U.S.? We just got a report from ABC News that a decision on a fourth shot for seniors could come within the next month. Is that what you're understanding as well?
Yes, the FDA is meeting about this on April 6th. So this is 2 Wednesdays now from now. And I think that I can't imagine that they're going to approve it for everybody. I think it will be exactly what you just said. Do seniors need a fourth dose? One thing I do want to add is that it also depends on how rapidly the virus is circulating and how high the virus is circulating in terms of needing a fourth dose. For example, here in the Bay Area, we have very low rates of COVID right now. We have not been affected by BA2. About 35% of strains are BA2 in the United States, but we haven't seen that surge. And in the future, different variants, if we go up high with viruses, that's when older people are going to need it. So it's different being in Hong Kong right now than it is here in the Bay Area.
Right. So as we talk about vaccines, Moderna announced today that their vaccine works in babies, toddlers, and preschoolers. So what does their vaccine for young children look like? And do you think that that is going to be passed by the FDA?
Well, that's a great question, because this was, again, their 6 months to just under 6-year-old trial. And what the Moderna dose was 25 micrograms once, and then another 25 microgram dose 4 weeks later. Remember, the Pfizer was 3 micrograms that didn't work very well, at least for 2 to 4 year olds. It didn't raise the right antibody response, so it wasn't approved by the FDA. So in this case, what Moderna showed is that between 6 months and 6 years, you got a nice antibody response, exactly the antibody response you'd want across the entire age range. That's good news. I think children needed a higher dose. The vaccine effective efficacy, which means, how well did it work? It was done in the time of Omicron, so it prevented mild infections at a pretty low rate, actually, 37% for the younger kids, 44% for the older kids. Importantly, though, that's kind of what 2 doses does for adults as well, in terms of mild infections. Likely, it would have prevented severe disease, but to be fair, there was no severe disease even in the placebo group, because these are very young children who are not at risk for severe disease. So to put it all together, it does increase antibodies. That hopefully means your T cells and B cells are being generated by these vaccines. And personally, if I had a young child, I would get them vaccinated.
Do you think by summer there'll be a vaccine then for these young children?
Sooner. I think sooner, because they just said that they're going to apply for the EUA in the European and the CD and the FDA now. They just put out the results today. So hopefully it's just the end of March. Hopefully we'll get it in a month.
That's good news. All right, so let's talk about the BA2 variant. You already talked about it a little bit, but how concerned should we be about a big surge of COVID in the coming months?
So BA2 is now 35% of our strains in the United States, and we still haven't seen a surge. And in other countries like Europe and the UK, we did see a surge when they started getting up around 25%, because it's more transmissible than BA1, which is the sister variant with Omicron. So Dr. Fauci said this morning, he doesn't think we're going to see a surge here. I'm not sure, but I don't think we are either, for 3 reasons. One is, if you've had BA1, which a lot of people saw in the United States, actually up to 75% of us saw BA1, it's hard to get BA2. Number 2, we have higher rates of vaccination now, thank goodness, and we have a lot of natural immunity. And then number 3, Denmark is like us in the Bay Area. They have high rates of vaccination. Cases went up, but their hospitalization stayed low.
That is good news, because I will say it does feel like we're hearing about quite a few people getting COVID right now. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Jen Psaki. I personally have friends and colleagues that are sick. So it does feel like it's still very much out there and people are getting it.
This is something that is really related to the fourth booster shot. If the virus is circulating, people may get mild infections with COVID. Before, you never would have known it was COVID or whatever. You never would have known it was a different cold virus because we don't test, but now we test. It's impossible to eradicate COVID. And I think that's something that we all have to accept. And at some point, we probably won't tell each other if we have a mild cold.
The interesting thing, though, is talking to some of my friends who currently have COVID and they're vaxxed and boosted. They say, wow, it's much worse than I thought it would be. Like, I'm much sicker than I thought I would be.
I think that is true. I've heard that anecdotally as well. And it just depends on how recent your booster was, because your booster gives you high antibodies and it depends on your age. And again, that's why I think older people are going to need that. They're just going to need that booster.
Right. So is the BA.2 variant more transmissible than previous variants?
It does look like it's more transmissible by 25%. It apparently isn't more virulent, at least according to Denmark data, meaning they didn't see more hospitalizations with BA.2 versus BA.1, but it is more transmissible. And whenever you have something more transmissible, it leads to cases going up, it leads to your friends and family seeing COVID, and then hopefully it comes back down, and hopefully we won't see a variant for a while.
Oh, we really, really hope so. But you've given us some positive, optimistic news today, Dr. Gandhi. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Although we will keep you during the commercial break if you have a couple minutes.
Okay,
cool.
Okay, yes.
Stick with us. We'll be right back. All right, Dr. Gandhi, let's talk. You and I talked on Monday for my story, and you said some interesting things about Ukraine. And obviously, there's a lot we're watching there, but one of them is the refugee crisis and potentially being a super spreader. How concerned are you about that?
So I am concerned in general about Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, all those countries, and especially right now with Ukraine being in such disarray, and I'm so sorry it's happening to them with the refugee crisis. They just don't have the rates of vaccination that Western Europe does. So it's the cleanest way to answer this is South Korea has a 90% vaccination rate. Cases are going super high, hospitalizations are staying low. Vaccination protects you against severe disease. Hong Kong, low vaccination rate in elderly people, and unfortunately cases and hospitalizations going up. So Ukraine not having a high vaccination rate is a big concern.
Absolutely. All right, I'm getting the wrap, Dr. Gandhi. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We always appreciate having you.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
All right, we're getting ready for our second guest, everybody. Hi, Facebook. Good seeing you. It's been a while. Kristen's off today. I'm used to anchoring mornings, hence why I suppose I thought it was still morning. But no, it's good to see all of you. Let me read some of your comments. I do think it's positive. You know, this week I spoke to both Dr. Gandhi and Dr. Rutherford from UCSF on Monday, and they both have really positive outlooks on what's happening with COVID-19, particularly here in the Bay Area, saying that it's very likely we might not even see a surge if we do see one until winter. So I would say that that's some good news, and we deserve that after the 2 years of doom and gloom. Gregory, I see your question. Can you mix and match that fourth dose for over 75? That's a good question. Hopefully next time we have a doctor on, we can ask that question. Thanks for sending that in. Okay, stand by, everybody.
20. 15. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back. A San Francisco supervisor is spearheading an effort to help end homelessness in the city. This week, District 8 Supervisor Raphael Mendelman introduced legislation that would require the city to provide shelter for anyone who needs it. He says while the cost could run into the tens of millions of dollars, the ultimate goal to eliminate homeless encampments on the streets is worth it. So Supervisor Mendelman joins us now to talk about this idea. Supervisor, thanks for being here. It's called A Place for All. San Francisco would be required to offer every person experiencing homelessness a safe place to sleep. Talk about how that would be done under your proposal.
Yeah, so actually my proposal is very modest and I think reasonable. It establishes the policy of the city and county of San Francisco to offer shelter to any unhoused person willing to accept it. And then directs the relevant departments, homelessness and supportive housing and real estate, to come back to us with a plan and a budget to get that done. And I think this is a reasonable and necessary thing, which is why I was surprised a year ago when we had such great opposition to this, much of it from homeless advocates.
Right. So I want to ask you about that. But first, just some nuts and bolts. How many homeless people are there in the city currently? And what do you know about how many are being sheltered versus unsheltered?
Yeah, so our last point in time count now was back in 2019. We've just completed, or we're in the process of completing one now. So we don't know what the latest data is. But back then, there were about 8,000 homeless folks, and about 5,000 of them were unsheltered in San Francisco. We know that not everyone who's on the streets is interested or willing to accept shelter, but we also know that insofar as we want to address the encampment crisis that we have, we need more shelter. Compared to other American cities, New York, Boston, and others, we are way under sheltered relative to our unhoused population.
So you mentioned that you first introduced a similar proposal and it was shot down. So what's different now?
Well, this time we have the support of 4 of my colleagues on the board, Supervisors Haney, Melgar, Marr, and Stephanie. And I think folks have come to a growing awareness that there is a connection between our underinvestment in immediate exits from the street and the proliferation of encampments around the city. San Francisco spends a huge amount of money, between $500 million, north of $500 million a year now, on addressing homelessness, but we are doing it by trying to solve homelessness through the provision of housing. And I believe in providing as much permanent supportive housing as we possibly can, but that is often years and years in the future. And we need a way of getting folks off the street tonight. And that's not going to be housing for everyone, but we should be able to provide at least a safe sleep site, a tiny home, a congregate shelter placement, something that is safer for those folks than being out in tents on the sidewalk, and something that will provide some relief to the neighborhoods in which those encampments have proliferated.
Where would these sites be located? Have you identified specific locations? Are there specific neighborhoods that you've identified?
No, as I said, this is just a first step. We need the Department of Real Estate and the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing to provide us with a plan for sites, where they might go, how much they're going to cost. We're just starting this process, but I think it's important for San Francisco to recognize that we need to do more to provide shelter, a lot more than we are doing, and that we need to focus resources in that direction.
So as you know very well, one big debate is, should people be forced into accepting housing? So how would that work with your proposal? What would you do if there are people who simply do not want this housing?
Well, this is the United States of America, and it's San Francisco, and we cannot force people to take shelter. But if we want to end encampments, if we want to remove encampments from the street, we are ethically, I think, and in fact legally required to offer people a safe place to be that is not the sidewalk. So I want San Francisco to be in a place where we can offer any unhoused person willing to come off the streets a safe and better alternative, and where we can also say that encampments can't remain in any neighborhood in San Francisco.
So why is it that there are so many people out on the streets in San Francisco? Is it simply a matter of not having enough beds, either temporary or long-term, or are there open beds and just a large amount of people who don't want to fill them?
There are people out on the streets who are not interested in shelter, but there are a lot of people out on the streets who would take shelter if it were offered. And we must make those offers, and we must get those folks into shelter if we're going to address the encampments. As I said, not everyone's going to take an offer of shelter, but if you don't make the offer, you can't address the encampment.
Right. So, of course, mental health is a huge part of this. How will that challenge be addressed in your proposal?
Well, we can provide shelters with special services for people with behavioral health issues, and we do. And even just getting someone into a tiny home or a safe sleep site and then offering services, I think is the path forward. There are people who are going to need way more intensive intervention. Some folks need conservatorships. Some folks need a lot of behavioral health support. But the first step is to get folks off of the sidewalk. And to do that, we have to provide a range of different shelter options.
All right. So a few more questions about this. What is the cost of your proposal, and how do you anticipate it would be funded?
I think we're going to be looking to that implementation plan I mentioned. We need to get cost estimates, and that's partly going to start with HSH telling us how many people they think might be willing to accept shelter. I would imagine it's at least 1,000 additional placements that we need, maybe more. And we know that shelter's not cheap. The cheapest kind of shelter is a safe sleep site or a tiny home, and those, are the cost of setting them up are far less than some of the navigation centers we've stood up. But if we're going to keep those places safe, we need to adequately staff them, and that does add cost. So I don't think this is cheap. I think this is a tens of millions of dollars proposal at least. But we spend, as I said, north of $500 million a year on homelessness, and that's not counting police response, paramedics, all the other costs to the city. And I think, spending the tens of millions of dollars that it will cost to provide the shelter that will allow us to address encampments and will provide safe exits for people willing to take them, is money well worth spending.
Absolutely. We need some solution. Something needs to change. So, Supervisor, thank you for joining us here to talk about this proposal. We appreciate it.
Glad to be here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. All right, coming up, we're going to talk about Oakland Restaurant Week. Excited for this, so stick with us. We'll be right back. All right. Hi, everybody. Again, let me look at your comments, see what's going on. I'm curious to get your opinions or thoughts on the supervisor's proposal there to make sure that we have housing offered to every single person living on the streets. Do you think this is a feasible proposal? Do you think that it would work? Let's see what some of you are saying. I think a lot of you are still talking about COVID and BA2. All right, there. So coming up, we're going to be talking about Restaurant Week. Do you guys have a favorite restaurant in the Bay Area that you like to go to? I would love your thoughts and opinions on that. And we're excited to have a restaurateur from Oakland joining us to talk about some really wonderful Israeli food options that are going to be offered at the Restaurant Week there in Oakland. We'll be back in 1 minute. All right, welcome back. Falafel, homemade pita, hummus, and so much more. You can find it all at Pomelo, which is one of the nearly 90 restaurants participating in Oakland Restaurant Week. You can indulge on food and drinks with delicious deals through March 27th. So here to talk Oakland Restaurant Week is the chef and owner of Pomelo, Mika Talmor. I hope I'm saying your name right. Are you there, Mika?
It's Mika. Thank you.
Mika, thank you. Okay, Oakland Restaurant Week includes food trucks, Michelin star restaurants, and everything in between. So tell us about the event and what does it entail?
So we are in the in-between. We are offering a special dinner of 4 courses with sangria, some of our favorites and some things that are off the menu. We're having hummus with eggplant, which is something that we don't always offer. And we put walnuts on top with fresh herbs and Aleppo pepper. And then we have one of our salads and a rice dish and a special dessert we made for you. And then sangria. So it's a dinner for 2. That's what we're offering this week.
That sounds delicious. So overall with Restaurant Week, what types of pricing do you typically see throughout Oakland with Restaurant Week?
It's quite a variety. Some people are doing lunch, and that's anywhere between $10 to $25, and then some people are doing dinner, which is anywhere from $25 to $60. So there's quite a lot of variety. There's quite a lot of restaurants. Some chefs are bringing new items. Some chefs have just come back after the toughest 2 years ever. So there's a lot going on right now, and there's a lot of variety. There's 90 restaurants.
Wow. So do people need reservations?
Some restaurants do take reservations and some not. I do suggest that you go to Visit Oakland's website and you check the list of restaurants and you see what they're offering. And also go to the websites of all the restaurants and see. All of us have put a lot of information up for this event.
All right, cool. So restaurants, as we all know, were hit particularly hard by the pandemic. How important is this event now that many places are still recovering financially?
This is so important, and it's of course, it's important financially, but it's also just so heartwarming. Our patio has been packed. It's just great to see people again, welcome them into our space. We've been doing a lot of takeout for the last 2 years. This event and spring at the same time is bringing people out, and it just feels celebratory. It feels so nice to be back.
Absolutely. How is your restaurant doing now? Are you starting to see more people coming back? Does it feel kind of back to normal?
Yeah, we didn't actually have a normal because we opened in March of 2020,
right.
At the end of March 2020. Yeah, it just the way things happened. I was building this location and we got our permits just before shelter in place. So we don't really have a normal. I could say that our first year we were just surviving. Day to day. It was just like, are we going to make it? And now, especially this last couple of months, especially this month, it just feels like we're winning. It feels like we're on. It's really heartwarming.
That is really heartwarming to see. And we are showing incredible images of your food. This is some of my favorite type of food, this Israeli Mediterranean food. Talk about some of these dishes again and what you're offering. We're seeing falafel here and hummus. Talk about your style of cooking.
So we offer Israeli food, which is a combination of Middle Eastern, Mediterranean, North African. We do a lot of North African dishes and some European, Eastern European. And it's that mix of all of the above that makes us us. In the picture that you're showing, you can see our special dinner for Restaurant Week. So you can find here very silky, I think very good hummus. I might say so myself. You can find naturally fermented pickles. We have at least 6 to 7 salads on the menu at any given time, pulling from different ethnicities and different influences and seasonal produce, of course. All of our produce is organic. Almost everything we use here is organic and locally sourced, except for some really specialty stuff like the tahini that is brought for us from Nazareth in Israel. And we also have some hot dishes. Our tagines are really popular. These are Moroccan style stews. Yeah. And
Micah, I'm getting the wrap, but I'm going to keep you through commercial breaks. So stand by. We got to take a quick break, but stick with us. All right, stick with us. We'll be right back.
Commercial break.
So, Micah, tell me, where are you from? Are you from Israel, and how did you get involved with cooking, and what are some of these recipes?
I'm Israeli.
Okay.
I've lived here now half my life, but I'm originally from Israel, born and raised.
Okay.
And I moved here after I was already in the industry. I worked in Israel. I went to culinary school in Israel, and I worked in Israel first before I moved here. I came here to specialize in pastry. So I came to the CCA in San Francisco back in the day. And I studied baking and pastry. And that's really my passion. Pamela is notorious for desserts now because we really just have gone all crazy during the pandemic.
I know. And what made you, or what was it like to open your restaurant during the pandemic? It was simply just timing. And were there any positives from opening up during the pandemic?
There's a lot of positives. I mean, obviously when it happened, we didn't know how it's going to pan out. My phrase is I was arranging the silverware on the Titanic. I was getting ready to open a restaurant focusing on fixtures and decorations in China while the world was, hitting a glacier. So I didn't know how it was going to pan out, but the most amazing thing is our community. Like, people showed up for us in a way that I couldn't have imagined before COVID. I think people in our community really made it a point to make sure that we survive. And that is incredible. That doesn't happen in regular time.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, so give us the quick nuts and bolts for people like me. Really, I have 30 seconds less. Your website and just let us know how people can go find you.
So you can find us at PamelaOakland.com. We have a very active Instagram page. So of course, please follow us on Instagram at Pomela Oakland.
All right.
And you can find our entire menu and shop our store at pomelaoakland.com.
Awesome.
Everything is
Micah, I gotta say
right
bye.
there.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, thanks so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. We'll be here every weekday at 3 on air and on live stream, answering your questions. World News Tonight is next, and we'll see you at 4. Have a great night.